On behalf of the NTD News Today team, we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a joyous holiday season.
Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump uses his veto power for the first time this term. The move tanks a pair of unanimously passed bills. Payments to Minnesota child care centers are frozen as federal agents go door-to-door to suspected fraud sites. The fallout from a viral investigative video continues to grow. Forced organ harvesting in China continued in 2025. To discuss the developments this past year in regards to combating the atrocity, we talked to the senior editor at the Epoch Times and host of American Thought Leader. The world is bidding goodbye to the year 2025. New Zealand rings in the new year with a dazzling fireworks show. In neighboring Australia, revelers hold a moment of silence before celebrating the arrival of 2026.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. President Trump has issued the first presidential vetoes of his second term in office. Trump overrode two bills that won unanimous approvals in Congress. The first is to finish the Arkansas Valley Conduit Act. It would help fund a major water drinking project for Colorado. Trump says the bill would continue the failed policies of the past by forcing federal taxpayers to bear even more of the massive costs of a local water project. It's unclear whether Congress will act to override the veto, which would require two-thirds support in both chambers. Trump also issued a veto related to a $14 million project to protect Osceola Camp, an area within the Everglades National Park in Florida. It's inhabited by members of a Native American tribe. Turning now to Minnesota and concerns over its widespread fraud. The fallout from a video by independent journalist Nick Shirley on alleged fraud at child and health care centers continues to grow. Health and Human Services now says it's freezing all federal child care funding to Minnesota. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more as federal investigations into alleged system-wide fraud ramps up.
HHS Deputy Secretary Jim O'Neill wrote on X, quote, "We have turned off the money spigot and we are finding the fraud."
We believe the state of Minnesota has allowed scammers and fake daycares to siphon millions of taxpayer dollars over the past decade.
O'Neill says HHS has taken 3 direct actions against what he called blatant fraud. The first step is activating the Defend the Spend system, enhanced payment oversight now applied to all federal child care funding nationwide.
Second, I've just signed and sent a demand letter to Governor Walz. I required a full 360 review of these centers. This includes attendance records, licenses, complaints, investigations, and inspections.
And third, we've launched a dedicated fraud reporting hotline and email address at childcare.gov. Whether you're a parent, a provider, a member of the public, we want to hear from you.
Anyone who's involved in perpetrating this fraud against the American people should expect to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Health and Human Services provides Minnesota with $185 million in child care funding each year.
That money should be helping 19,000 American children, including toddlers and infants. Any dollar stolen by fraudsters is stolen from those children.
Adams says he spoke directly this week with the director of the Minnesota Child Care Services Office.
She could not tell me with confidence whether those allegations of fraud are isolated or whether there's fraud stretching statewide.
Federal agents have surged into the state for a massive investigation into alleged fraudulent activity in child care operations. Homeland Security Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs, Tricia McLaughlin, says agents were going door-to-door at suspected fraud sites, speaking on Fox News.
Our Homeland Security investigators on the ground are also seeing that these suspected perpetrators are really trying to cover their tracks. They're trying to whitewash the operational facts on the ground, purporting to be a legitimate business, have legitimate business operations, when it's all a fugazi.
Federal authorities estimate about $9 billion has been lost to fraudulent claims in the state's federal assistance programs. Governor Walz disputes that number, calling it sensationalized and motivated by politics. Nearly 100 people have been charged since 2022 in connection with daycare fraud in Minnesota, and 85 of them were of Somali descent. Independent journalist Nick Shirley and his researcher David returned to the Quality Learning Center in Minneapolis yesterday.
And what makes this daycare even more interesting is that while the Commissioner of Children of Minnesota was saying that the daycare was closed on a live stream,
Quality Learning Center closed just over a week ago.
A Somalian man was outside talking about how they are open, letting children in, and right now they are funneling children into the daycare.
Shirley says he's facing serious threats after exposing the alleged Minnesota fraud.
It's like bounties on me here in Minnesota because people are so upset as far as the fraud that's being exposed because they know their time's up and they know everyone's just sick and tired of this happening inside their own state and across America.
Shirley's researcher in the viral video, David, says he filed a criminal complaint against Walz over daycare fraud allegations, speaking on Fox News.
I think Tim's going to have a bad day, and he deserves it because he allowed this fraud.
Governor Tim Walz reacted to HHS freezing payments to Minnesota, calling it President Trump's long game to defund programs that help Minnesotans. Walz says the state has spent years cracking down on fraudsters. Attorney General Pam Bondi praised Shirley on X, saying his work has helped show Americans the scale of fraud in what she called Tim Walz's Minnesota. Bondi warned lawmakers to buckle up, saying more prosecutions are coming. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
In response to the reports of widespread fraud, House Republicans are expanding their investigation, and a top House Republican calls for ICE to get involved. NTD's Melina Weisskopf reports.
Congressman Tom Emmer of Minnesota, the number 3 Republican in House leadership, is turning up the pressure on fraudsters amid widespread investigations in his state. Emmer is calling for deportation and denaturalization, writing on X, "If they're here illegally, deport them immediately. If they're naturalized citizens, revoke their citizenship and deport them quickly thereafter." House Republicans have expanded their investigation into the fraud, requesting interviews with top officials from the state and data from the governor. Now a group of state lawmakers are calling for Governor Walz's resignation. In a joint statement, the group wrote, "The governor had a duty to oversee his administration and protect these programs. He failed. There needs to be consequences." The governor's office has pushed back, saying he's been investigating the issue and hired an outside firm to audit high-risk programs. The billion-dollar scandal could make Governor Walz's race for a third term more challenging. Several Republicans are vying to compete for a seat that a Republican hasn't held for 15 years. Over in Ohio, a group of lawmakers are warning that a similar child care scheme could be happening. Around 40 state lawmakers are calling on the state to investigate Columbus area daycares suspected of potential fraud. A spokesperson for the governor told the Epoch Times that Ohio has stronger safeguards than Minnesota appears to have. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Alleged welfare fraud in Minnesota now a top priority for the Trump administration. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told Fox and Friends earlier today that the administration has surged resources to the state.
The Department of Justice, as we speak, is continuing to execute search warrants and subpoenas. People will be in handcuffs as a result of the fraud that Governor Walz has allowed to occur for many, many years. The Department of Homeland Security is conducting door-to-door investigations on the ground at potential fraud sites.
The White House press secretary said denaturalization is an option President Trump is considering. She said people of Somali descent could get their U.S. citizenship revoked if they are convicted of fraud. Leavitt added that the DHS and the Department of State are already looking into it right now. But she acknowledged that some judges will try to stop the administration from pursuing this path. The Department of Labor is investigating Minnesota's unemployment insurance program, and deportation operations are also continuing. The press secretary stressed that the administration will not tolerate waste, fraud, and abuse. She added that other states like California and New York will be under investigation as well. The House Oversight Committee will hold a hearing on the alleged fraud next Wednesday, with Minnesota lawmakers testifying. The Department of Health and Human Services announced it has frozen all child care payments to the state of Minnesota. Joining us to discuss is Simon Hankinson, Senior Research Fellow in the Border Security and Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation. So good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us today. And HHS Deputy Secretary Jim O'Neill said that they're turning off the money spigot to stop the misuse of federal dollars. What is your initial reaction to this move?
Well, if you've got a massive leak, the first thing you want to do is stop it, right? And then investigate the causes of the leak. This is a monumental scandal. We know that, especially during COVID, there was a rash of fraud across all these federal programs with the billions of dollars pouring out of the Treasury. But this particular concentration of fraud is worrying in that it is in one particular community in one particular state. And the scale of the fraud, it's not just child care centers, autism, housing, just a range of benefits. I think that is a wise policy to stop the money flowing until you can verify who it's flowing to. If people can show that they genuinely qualify for these programs, then they should get the money. But unless they can prove that they have children with special needs or that are going to these daycare centers, they shouldn't get it. And I think a longer term project has to be to seriously look at why the federal government is subsidizing housing through Medicaid, which is not anything to do with medical care, and maybe put some more responsibility on cities and states to pay their own bills so that they pay when fraud happens and not people in Washington, D.C. and North Carolina and Florida.
Okay, let's talk about the requirements here. Before this action by HHS, what were the requirements for a state to qualify for federal funding through the Administration for Children and Family, also known as the ACF? And is there anything that needs to be improved in this process so that we see less fraud?
Well, I'm not an expert on federal benefits programs, but what is clear is that the oversight on these programs was ridiculously lax. Now, I would argue, I'm a conservative, that the fact that all these programs existed in the first place was a mistake. I don't think the federal government should be responsible for feeding and caring for the entire population regardless of need. I think when you have high concentrations of poverty like this, it should be more of a state and local concern, but that's a separate issue. If the programs do exist and they have rules, there should be adequate oversight. And what we've been seeing is that inspectors were going to these daycare centers and they were looking up and realizing that there are all kinds of mistakes and things, boxes that weren't being ticked in terms of regulations. And they didn't seem to follow up and make sure that there were actually children attending and staff who were qualified, who were holding these classes, and that the whole operation was being run properly. So it's a bit of a mess from a regulatory point of view, from the bottom all the way up to the top.
Okay, Simon, so you mentioned oversight a few times now. How in your view, did this happen? How did we get to this point where fraud in Minnesota has now become a national story?
I think there's several different layers to this, but what I really think should not be overlooked is that politicians in Minnesota, from Tim Walz to his lieutenant governor to the attorney general, right on down to the mayor of Minneapolis, were pandering to this Somali community for electoral reasons, and they seemed really averse or frightened of investigating genuine leads because they were worried about the political implications. And look, I don't care where the fraud is coming from. If it's Somalis, if it's third generation Minnesotas of Scandinavian origin, who cares? The fact is, people shouldn't steal money. And I'm sure that a lot of members of the Somali community don't want to see federal money and local benefits money stolen if maybe they could qualify for programs that money could pay for. So across the board, this is a political failure. This has been hiding in plain sight. I was a consular officer for many years, and I've seen a lot of fraud. And as soon as you start pulling a little bit on the thread of a fraudulent case, it very quickly unravels and becomes obvious. And then you can start passing it over to prosecutors to take care of business. But in this case, it seemed like there was little curiosity on the part of the officials who were supposed to be responsible for these programs, partly because, it's state and federal money. And they figured, well, we can just, as long as they're not asking questions, why should we ask questions? And they're not being good stewards of our money.
Okay, Simon, you mentioned the Somalian community and other communities. Is there an argument to be made about the design itself of these programs, that there may be gaps that potentially can be easily exploited? not by just one group, but by any person or group?
Absolutely. Look, I have lived in countries that are extremely corrupt, low trust societies, you might call them, where it's very common, to cheat on exams, to not pay your taxes, to cheat on paperwork, whether it's for real estate purposes, driver's licenses, right through the entire society. The United States has not traditionally been that kind of place. Yes, we have our issues. We do have corruption from time to time, but it's not very common for people to pay bribes, for example, to get a driver's license, or to get off a speeding ticket, or to be able to build a house where you're not supposed to build a house. Those are exceptions, I would say, in the United States. They are not exceptions in Somalia and in many other countries. And so for people coming from those countries, they need to be educated. They need to understand how our system works. And to do that, you have to enforce rules. And I think in this case, the state of Minnesota and the city of Minneapolis, or the Twin Cities, just completely failed in their duty. And as a result, we're all going to pick up the pieces and pay what looks like over $1 billion of money that's disappeared.
Okay, so Simon, yesterday we talked to a guest, and I asked him if he thought the state of welfare in Minnesota, whether that's overly generous or not. You've already alluded to this. Can you just talk a bit more, your thoughts on whether federal subsidies of this kind are excessive and too unregulated, not just in Minnesota, but across the country?
I think they are. And I think it's not just in the United States. If you look across Western Europe, there have been some studies in the past few years that have demonstrated conclusively that refugees and people from certain countries are massive net drains to the fiscal health of the country over their lifetimes. Now, a country can choose to make that decision, and they can choose to pay out for individuals, but they have to understand the costs that go with that. And I think in a state like Minnesota, if you look at the percentage of Minnesota-born, so native-born Americans who claim benefits, is significantly lower than the percentage of Somali immigrants, and I'm sure other communities that are on benefits. I have something like a study by the Center for Immigration Studies showed that almost 90% of Somali-led households with children were on some kind of federal welfare benefit program, whereas it was only like 25% among the population as a whole. So you have programs that are designed for people who are indigent, who are in real need, that are vulnerable to exploitation and fundamentally have limited budgets. I think the housing program had a budget of like $3 million. That was what they expected to spend, and it ballooned up to well over $100 million in a very short time because of abuse. So yeah, federal welfare and even state and local welfare cannot be a blank check, because the revenue coming into the coffers is not unlimited.
Okay, Simon, just one last question. I'm just thinking about solutions here. Do you think if we could just end illegal immigration through whatever means, do you think that will have a huge impact in reducing fraud?
Well, ending illegal immigration, yes, would have a huge impact on a lot of things. It would free up housing. It would make the job market more lucrative for Americans and legal immigrants competing for jobs. But this is a question of legal immigrants. Most of the Somalis involved in these scams are either U.S. citizens by naturalization, or some by birth, or they are legal immigrants, or they're under some permanent status as refugees, for example, on their way to being legal permanent residents and citizens. So it's not just a question of illegal immigration. It is a question of the number of people that we're bringing in who have limited job skills, no English, and no ability to ever in their lifetimes produce more income and give more taxes to the state than they're going to take out in benefits, from health to education to all of these 80 plus federal welfare programs we have. And that's not to stigmatize anybody, but it's just a fact of life. If you are going to bring in large numbers of people from countries where they are not at the skill level where they're going to be able to contribute, you're going to have a net loss to the fisc every year. And I think that's something that no one has really paid much attention to over the past few years. We've been sold the opposite. We've been told that all immigration is good because they will all contribute to the economy and make us all richer. But the data is just not there to back that up.
Okay, Simon, just one final question, for real this time. Is there an argument to be made that these legal immigrants who are in the United States, they may not have the skills initially, but over the lifespan of their stay in the United States, that over time they'll make up the shortcomings in the beginning later on?
Frankly, it depends where they come from. Not all immigrants are the same. There's been some research, a guy called Daniel DiMartino out of the Manhattan Institute, who I don't always agree with on immigration, but he wrote a good paper recently breaking down which immigrants contribute over their lifetime and which don't. And obviously, this is not an exact science, but for example, a 30-year-old rocket scientist from China or India or Belgium over his or her lifetime is likely to contribute significantly more into the U.S. Treasury than they take out. But an illiterate, non-English speaking, non-high school educated immigrant from Yemen or Pakistan or Somalia, for example, will take out more in their lifetime than they put in. So you have to look at who has been coming in over the past few years. Look at the profile of the people, for example, from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Afghanistan who've been admitted under these parole programs. You plug them into that model, and you will find that a majority of them probably will not contribute in their lifetimes. Who knows? I mean, obviously some will. There's always exceptions. There's going to be some brilliant people among the ones who come in, and maybe their children and grandchildren will turn out to be, doctors and lawyers and rocket scientists and presidents of the United States. But we don't know that. What we know for now is that on balance, they're probably going to be a net loss to the Treasury.
Okay, Simon, really great insight today. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
The Justice Department is suing Virginia over a law regarding tuition at its public colleges. In 2020, the state passed a law that allows illegal immigrants in Virginia to qualify for in-state tuition. They have to live there for 2 years to qualify. The Justice Department is arguing that that is illegal because it discriminates against U.S. citizens living in other states. They have to pay a more expensive out-of-state tuition. The Trump administration previously filed similar lawsuits in California and Illinois. In June, a federal judge in Texas blocked a law that did the same thing there. SNAP recipients will no longer be allowed to buy soda or candy through the program starting tomorrow. More news after this break.
Picture this, the heart of Manhattan, full of energy, movement, and life. Now imagine bringing that same vitality into your home with trusted health insights for your body, mind, and soul. Every week, Vital Signs dives into health issues that matter the most. The foods that strengthen your immune system, the exercises that keep you moving, the mindfulness practices that calm your mind, plus expert advice from doctors and health leaders you can trust. This isn't just another health show. It's real insight designed to keep you informed, inspired, and in motion. So whether you're starting your day with focus or winding down with balance, Vital Signs brings health and vitality straight into your living room.
Hi, my name is Brady. When I was born, my parents thought everything was okay. My mom and dad were so excited to take me home.
I still get goosebumps telling this story. Several days in, his skin started to become very cold and clammy. We noticed that he had become blue around his mouth, and something was just very off.
We packed out as fast as we could. Brady stopped breathing twice on the way to the pediatrician. And that was one of the #1 things that just haunts me to this day.
I was born with a congenital heart defect called aortic coarctation. If my parents waited just 1 more hour to drive me to the hospital, I would not be here today. But thanks to research funded by the American Heart Association, I had heart surgery that saved my life. But not every kid is as lucky as me, which is why we need your help. Just call the number on the screen or go to helpheart.org. For only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you can help. Get people trained in CPR. Get more hospitals certified in high-quality cardiovascular care. And help fund the next medical breakthroughs to help save kids like me.
When you donate to the American Heart Association, you're helping save lives like my son. And now my son is happy and healthy thanks to the support of people like you.
When you call with your $19 a month, you'll get this really cool t-shirt as a thank you. Many children die from congenital heart defects. I can't wait to grow up to become a heart surgeon and fix babies' hearts, but until then, I'll keep helping the American Heart Association. So please join me. Just call the number on your screen or go to helpheart.org to become a monthly donor and help save lives.
The Department of Agriculture has taken the fizzle out of SNAP benefits. New restrictions on soda and candy go into effect tomorrow for a Supplement Nutrition Assistance Program. And this applies to 5 states: Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, Utah, and West Virginia. They are the first of 18 states to enact waivers prohibiting the purchase of certain foods through SNAP. This is part of Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s push to strip unhealthy food from the program. Critics charge the SNAP program is already under pressure from steep budget cuts and unprepared for the complex change. Turning to Iowa, Democrat Renee Hardman has won a special election for the Iowa State Senate. Her victory dashed Republicans' hopes of reclaiming a supermajority in the state. The race was called by the Associated Press shortly after the polls closed at 9 p.m., with Hardman decisively defeating Republican challenger Lucas Lofton. The election was to replace State Senator Claire Celsey, a Democrat who died in October. Republicans had hoped for an upset victory in the Democrat-leaning district. The party lost control of the upper chamber in a surprise defeat suffered in August. The granddaughter of former President John F. Kennedy has died at age 35. In an essay for The New Yorker just last month, Tatiana Schlossberg first shared her terminal cancer diagnosis, discovered last year after she gave birth to her daughter. Her family wrote in a statement yesterday, "Our beautiful Tatiana passed away this morning. She will always be in our hearts." Flu cases are on the rise nationwide. In addition to millions of cases, the CDC estimates there have been 81 hospitalizations, 81,000 in fact, and 3,100 deaths. Here's more on this story.
What we're seeing right now is a very rapid escalation in cases.
Health experts sounding the alarm as flu activity increases sharply across the U.S. Most states are seeing high or very high activity, and those levels are rising nationwide. The CDC estimates there have been at least 7.5 million illnesses from flu this season, based on data through December 20th.
We're seeing also a major increase in hospitalizations, emergency room department visits, and even deaths.
So why are flu cases surging? There's also the type of flu we're seeing this season.
Flu is always made up of several different subtypes of viruses. We have one this year that's a bit unusual. It's called H3N2. It is associated with just more severe illness, and we're seeing a lot more people get infected.
Also, genetic testing indicates a new flu variant called subclade K appears to be behind the vast majority of cases in the U.S.
It's a different subclade, or kind of a different strain.
This new variant wasn't included in this year's flu shots. It was identified after scientists chose the strains to include.
Billionaires in Silicon Valley are threatening to leave California. This as some state lawmakers are voicing support for a special tax on wealthy residents. NTD's David Lamb has more.
Entrepreneurs, including company founders and venture capitalists, took to social media criticizing support for a proposed 5% billionaire tax in California. Congressman Ro Khanna argued for the tax, saying it would help cover Medicaid. Residents who have a net worth higher than $1 billion would face a one-time tax of 5% payable over 5 years. The New York Times reports that Google co-founder Larry Page and tech investor Peter Thiel are considering leaving the state to avoid the proposed measure. The 2026 Billionaire Tax Act was proposed by Suzanne Jimenez, chief of staff of a California healthcare union. Under the act, the funds raised would cover equitable health care and support funding for kindergarten through grade 14 public education and food assistance. Around 90% of the revenue would go into health care and 10% into education and food assistance. According to the proposal, there are around 200 billionaires in California who possess a combined $2 trillion in wealth. If voters approve the measure, it would apply retroactively to anyone who lived in California as of January 1st, 2026. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
U.S. stocks are on track to see a third straight year of double-digit gains. The S&P 500 is set to rise 17% this year. That's after rising 23% in 2024 and 24% in 2023. That gain comes despite concerns about tariffs, geopolitical turmoil, worries about a bubble, and the longest government shutdown in history. 3 straight years of double-digit gains is relatively rare, happening only 5 times since the 1940s. And today isn't just the last day of 2025, it's also Warren Buffett's last day as the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. The 95-year-old has served as the CEO for 60 years. He announced his retirement earlier this spring. The famed investor has spent much of his life among the top 10 richest people in the world. According to Bloomberg, he has racked up a net worth of around $150 billion. Buffett will remain as chairman. Greg Abel, who is the vice chairman of non-insurance operations of Berkshire, will take over as the new CEO. Forced organ harvesting in China continued in 2025. To discuss developments this past year in regards to combating the atrocity, we talked to the senior editor at the Epoch Times and host of American Thought Leaders. After this break.
Being a cowboy, I don't know anything different from when I was 3 or 4 years old. I did tough things. I thought everybody needed to do tough things, and if you didn't, I didn't have time for it. I had a very successful career at a very young age, and life was fast. I was preparing physically. I wasn't doing anything mentally on the inside. And then I got hurt. I wanted to be better as a person, and I really dug into mental health. I start my day with 20-minute workouts. I live life 8 seconds at a time. Horses are so therapeutic. They know what you're feeling. When you're nervous, they're nervous. You won't say it back, but we're pals. I take a lot of responsibility in taking care of my kids, my family, being there for them. You're gonna have tough days. Everybody does. Find a place to stop and just breathe. Love your mind.
Hi, I'm Ryan Blaney, a third-generation race car driver, and we dedicate a lot of our time to going as fast as possible. My grandpa Lou is the reason why my dad and I started racing, and I'm really proud to follow in his tracks. But when my grandpa was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it was a very unexpected bump in the road for us. I've learned a lot on this journey with my grandpa Lou, and the memories of my grandpa will always be with me. And in our family, we're used to getting involved, and I encourage you to do the same, especially when it comes to caring for your loved ones. When I think about Alzheimer's and the impact it had on my family, I recognize that losing a race isn't such a bad day after all. It's important to notice if older family members are acting differently, experiencing problems with their memory, or having trouble with routine tasks. Talking about Alzheimer's can be really tough, but if you notice something, have a conversation with your loved one. Encourage them to see a doctor or offer to go with them. Early detection of Alzheimer's can give your family time to explore support services, make a plan for the future, and access available treatments. If you or your family are noticing changes, it could be Alzheimer's. Talk about seeing a doctor together.
Mounting evidence and conclusions reached by human rights and medical experts point to an ongoing large-scale crime against humanity in China, and that is forced organ harvesting. Reports say that the persecuted adherents of the spiritual practice Falun Dafa are likely the primary targets. To discuss developments this past year on combating the forced organ harvesting phenomenon in China under the CCP, joining us is Jan Jekielek, senior editor at the Epoch Times, host of American Thought Leaders on Epoch TV, and author of the new upcoming book on this very topic, Killed to Order: China's Organ Harvesting Industry and the True Nature of America's Biggest Adversary, out on March 10th. So Jan, so good to have you here. Good afternoon. Can you just speak to us to start off? What would you say is the biggest step forward so far in stopping forced organ harvesting under the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, really, it's been the accumulation of almost 20 years of work. And I would say the single event that I think precipitated the biggest knowledge or the awareness of this was the survivor emerging. There's actually a survivor, Cheng Pei-ming, a man who is missing part of his lung and part of his liver and lived to tell the tale. Just to let people know, this concept of forced organ harvesting, this is something that can only happen with a state actor. Okay, this is something where you need to have a large population of people that you've dehumanized through propaganda, and you need to incarcerate a whole lot of them, perhaps 1 million, it's unclear. And then you need to DNA type them or blood type them and tissue type them at the very least. And then you actually have a database. So that's when someone can look up an ad, and this has happened many times over the last 20 years, look up an ad, and the ad says, I can get you a new heart in 2 weeks for a hefty sum. And that you can actually go to China and get a predetermined, a pre-timed transplant, scheduled transplant, which is something that's impossible in any ethical system. So this is something very different than the typical black market organ trade that we hear about. But the biggest development, as I said, would be that there's actually someone who lived the tale. And as a result, there's been a whole flurry of activity this last year, especially on the legislative side around this.
And Jan, I'll just add to that. His name is Cheng Pei-ming, and what's crazy to me about this is that I was doing research, right? He didn't even know he had a part of his lung and liver removed, not until he came to the United States and had a medical exam. That is just mind-boggling to me. And he continued to speak out in 2025. So based on that, maybe you can talk to us about what more have we learned about China's forced organ harvesting machine?
Well, there was a big moment that happened, actually, and that was, it's been dubbed the hot mic moment of Xi Jinping. You know, it almost sounds like a joke. Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un walk into a bar. They didn't walk into a bar. It was in Tiananmen Square they were walking, and on a hot mic was caught elements of a conversation. Basically, Xi says to Putin, I'm going to paraphrase here, you know, at 70, we're just a baby at this point. And Putin says back, through continual organ transplantation, we can perhaps achieve immortality. And then Xi returns with the idea that 150 years is the target. And this 150 years is kind of a code word for China's, you could call it like an elite longevity project, Project 981. They always have these kind of numerical names for things. And what I realized the moment I heard this, right, and this is the thing, I've been in this space 20 years, reporting on it for 20 odd years on and off, but it just hadn't occurred to me how central the organ industry itself is to that longevity project, right? Imagine we're talking about, you know, an estimated $9 billion a year industry, you know, 60 to 90,000 transplants a year from likely prisoners of conscience. I mean, this is a massive scale thing we're talking about, right? Well, here's what I realized at this moment. Imagine what it would be worth if you're one of these super elite in communist China and you have unlimited on-demand organs available to you forever. And that strikes me as something that's worth more than even $9 billion. So that is a huge revelation this year.
Jan, do we know at all if forced organ harvesting in China has increased over the years or decreased?
So there's a bit of debate around this, around the experts. So basically it happened at a low level until about the year 2000. Then they incarcerate, you know, 1 million plus Falun Gong practitioners, okay, into the entire system. And then basically the hospitals start growing, the number of transplants starts growing. It kind of peaks up to the year about 2005, near exponential growth during that time period. And as far as we can tell, there's been huge amounts of transplants since that time to present. But because the international community didn't really respond meaningfully, there were even organizations that I would argue were basically running cover for the whole system. In 2014, the CCP turned to another victim group, we believe, the Uyghurs. And this is actually, Ethan Gutmann is writing a book right now, The Xinjiang Procedure. It's going to be published around the same time as Kill to Order, where he looks deeply into this question on how much has this, how many Uyghurs have been added to the system. So at this point, we're unclear. We know that there's millions of Uyghurs in the forced labor camp systems, we could call them concentration camps. And Ethan has, I think, shown quite definitively that some of them are victims of forced organ harvesting. It's unclear if this is in addition to the Falun Gong practitioners that are currently being used that way. It's unclear whether it's gone down. It's very hard to get these numbers right because they're all a state secret. People can be executed for revealing some of them. But I think the biggest take-home message is that if you don't actually deal with these types of extreme crimes against humanity, they shift, and in this cases, or add another victim group, because why not? The opportunity is there, the business opportunity is there. And the other piece that is also actually incredibly important is because of America's and other Western countries' deep engagement with Communist China along a whole lot of different vectors, including, for example, training the surgeons or providing materials for transplantation. There's many research grants, collaborations, and so forth. America's system itself has actually become, there are dead donor rule violations in the American system, and 2 transplant systems have actually been decertified by HHS for these reasons. And I would argue it's when you work with a system where, as far as we can tell, essentially most of the transplants, or probably all of the, if not all of the transplants, are dead donor rule violations, that actually rubs off. So it's a huge, huge issue.
Okay, Jan, I want to try to fit in a few more angles here. I want to talk to you about the U.S.'s efforts to combat forced organ harvesting. So some positive developments, both the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act of 2025 and the Falun Gong Protection Act passed in the House, but it's currently stalled in the Senate. But the good news is Secretary of State Marco Rubio has promised to be helpful in any way possible to facilitate the passage of the bills that aim to counter this atrocity. So maybe you can speak to us about the U.S.'s efforts here. Do you expect more movement on those bills in 2026?
Well, Secretary Rubio, as senator, he actually originated the Falun Gong Protection Act in the Senate in the previous Congress. So you can see his kind of commitment to this issue. I think the opportunity is huge. I mean, it's really only very recent that we've had any federal legislation related to forced organ harvesting. There have been a few resolutions that passed by acclamations, but these 2 pieces of legislation that you mentioned, they actually passed the House near unanimously. I think there was 1 dissent across both of these bills. So this is kind of a no-brainer in the Senate. I think that the issue is they just have to be brought out of committee, and it'll take a few senators that are, deeply committed to making that happen. There's a number of them that are already working on it. I think the other part is, there's obviously people watching out there. If this legislation is important to you, and I think it should be important to anyone, because this is, again, I always argue that these very extreme crimes against humanity, as we talked about earlier, they spread if they're not kind of held in check, right? It's not about interfering in the affairs of another country or something. It's basically like, protecting ourselves from some very, very extreme things. So what I would hope is that this year we see a groundswell of people basically reaching out to their elected representatives and asking them for support. The other part I should mention, there's actually 7 states now that have actually passed legislation into law that makes it illegal for Medicare and insurance to actually fund transplants in China. So that's also, and so, 43 states to go, and a number of them are considering it. It's a big shift, and I think it can really transform federally as well.
For sure, we'll keep an eye on those developments throughout 2026. And Jan, just one last thing here. The documentary film, State Organs Unmasking Transplant Abuse in China, it was an official contender for Best Documentary Feature at the Oscars in 2025. Can I just ask you, how much more aware do you think the public is or has become in the past year on this issue?
I would say massively. And the reason I say this, again, I've been following this issue for the better part of 20 years. And when we started, the hardest thing to do was actually to get people to accept that this could possibly be happening. Because as human beings, we just have this revulsion when we hear such extreme things. It's like some of us just shut down. I mean, I was even doing this at the beginning. So I think at the moment when I talk to people about it, when I give talks, I've given briefings, I've talked about it in state houses and so forth. Basically people are ready to accept that this is something that's really happening. And I think that moment is really transformational because basically that kind of spreads the moment it becomes collectively something that's understood in society. I actually think we can make an impact. And these pieces of legislation, by the way, they're not just performative, right? They will, for example, sanction some of the people involved. And those people, maybe they have exit strategies to America with, all of China's difficulties today. Most of them actually do. If they do, then they'll think maybe twice about being involved in this industry if they want to keep that exit strategy. And that'll save a few lives, right? So basically, I think we're in a unique situation, at least in the past 20 years, that we've actually known as a fact that this thing is happening.
Well, all right, Jan, it's really great to speak with you. And I just want to encourage all of our viewers watching right now to take a look at your book that is coming out next year. It'll have really insightful information. Thank you for speaking with us today, Jan.
Such a pleasure.
Taiwan remained on high alert today after China conducted massive military drills around the island. Taiwan's Coast Guard said the situation is now calming, with Chinese ships gradually departing, but emergency response centers remain active. The communist regime called the drills a warning against forces seeking Taiwan independence. They followed a record $11 billion U.S. arms package for Taiwan. The exercises involved dozens of rockets and more than 90 naval and Coast Guard vessels. Nearly 80 military aircraft were also deployed, some crossing the Taiwan Strait median line. China will impose an additional 55% tariff on beef imports that exceed quota limits from major suppliers. That includes Brazil, Australia, and the United States. China's Commerce Ministry says the move is aimed at protecting its domestic cattle industry. The total beef import quota for 2026 will be 2.27 million metric tons, slightly below China's record imports in 2024. The measures take effect January 1st and will remain in place for 3 years, with quotas rising annually. The world is bidding goodbye to 2025. New Zealand rings in the new year with a dazzling fireworks show. In neighboring Australia, revelers hold a moment of silence before celebrating 2026. More news after this break.
This land, our America, built on hard work, determination, and grit. Sometimes the days run long, but hope, it never runs out, even when the food does, for America's veterans, working parents, even kids. Because in every corner of every town, even yours, millions of hard-working neighbors are facing a hunger crisis, many for the very first time. In this land of plenty, affording food shouldn't require second jobs and third shifts or choosing between your groceries and bills. Today, you can help change that. Call or go online to helpfeedingamerica.org and give $19 a month, less than 63 cents a day, to help every neighbor get the food they urgently need. Because taking care of each other is what makes America strong. We're Feeding America, not just a name, but an action. Working with over 200 local food banks like the ones in your community. And demand is soaring.
You go to the grocery store, you spend $100, and $100 is a new $20 bill.
Even with 2 full-time jobs, it gets hard to make ends meet.
These are tough times, but when we stand together, we become the very best of a strong America. Please call or go online to helpfeedingamerica.org. Just $19 a month can feed a family today. And your first gift can double an impact. Plus, we'll send you this free canvas bag as a reminder of the hope you're delivering.
When it comes down to it, it's about taking care of your family first and the loved ones that you need to provide for.
Because you're not just giving food, you're fueling resilience for people across the nation. You're feeding America. Call or go online today to helpfeedingamerica.org, and your gift can double in impact.
You are not hidden. There's never been a moment you were forgotten. You are not hopeless. Though you have
On streets across America, homeless young people are cold, abused, in danger. Covenant House is helping young people with nowhere else to turn. Please call or go online now with your gift of $19 a month. You'll help provide hot meals, safe shelter, medical care, and love. We'll send you this comforting blanket as a reminder of the love you're showing a young person this holiday season. Call or go online now to safeplacetosleep.org, and your first month's gift will be matched.
Revelers in New Zealand were among the first in the world to ring in the new year. A fireworks show in Auckland helped welcome the arrival of 2026. Here's more.
The event started with a 10-second countdown projected on the base of Auckland's Sky Tower. Organizers said the fireworks launched from 3 levels of the 1,000-foot structure. 3,500 fireworks erupted from around the tower, rocketing 260 feet above. The 5-minute show featured 1,100 pounds of fireworks launched from the Sky Tower. The Auckland Harbour Bridge lit up the sky, adding to a festive welcome to the new year. And meanwhile, in neighbouring Australia, Sydney's largest ever fireworks display turned the Sydney Harbour Bridge into a spectacle of colour. Organisers held a minute of silence for the victims of the recent Bondi Beach attack an hour before the show. The 12-minute display stretched more than 4 miles along the harbour, the show featuring a staggering 25,000 individual pyrotechnics. Fireworks were also launched from the Sydney Opera House, 6 city rooftops, and 6 aerial platforms hovering above the water.
Around the world today, revelers are gathering for New Year's Eve celebrations as cities around the world prepare to ring in 2026 at the stroke of midnight. Here's more.
At one of the most famous New Year's Eve celebration sites in Times Square, the nonpartisan organization America 2050 is teaming up with One Times Square to mark 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This year's ball drop will also include special red, white, and blue confetti, as well as a special new design and dynamic pyro display set of a rendition of America the Beautiful. This year's ball is named the Constellation Ball and is the 9th ball since 1907 to be showcased at Times Square. It's 12.5 feet in diameter, features over 5,000 crystals and LED lights, and weighs over 12,000 pounds. Times Square will also be hosting a second ball drop later in the year on July 3rd in honor of the 250th Independence Day. America 250 will also be hosting a special light event at the National Mall in D.C. for 6 straight nights starting tonight. They'll be projecting a special image onto the Washington Monument, including a 250-foot birthday candle. The projections will begin tonight at 7 p.m. and will run until 6 minutes past midnight.
It's already 2026 in Taiwan. Thousands of people there gathered in front of the Taipei 101 tower to celebrate the new year. The tower lit up the sky with dazzling fireworks as the clock struck midnight. Taipei 101 is Taiwan's tallest skyscraper. The firework display lasted a total of 6 minutes and was accompanied by a music and light show. The Taipei 101 fireworks display has been held since 2003, has become one of the most watched events on television in Taiwan. It is known for drawing a huge crowd of spectators to the streets every year. And for the first time in 20 years, rain is expected to shower the thousands of spectators at the Rose Parade in Southern California. This is the 5th wettest season on record in Los Angeles. Here's AccuWeather's Dan DePodwin with the forecast.
Heaviest rain Wednesday night into the start of the new year on Thursday, and that will have an impact on any New Year's Eve celebrations. Probably the heaviest rain after midnight, but the Rose Parade in Pasadena on Thursday morning, followed by the Rose Bowl game on Thursday afternoon. It can be wet. Probably the wettest is during the morning on Thursday in Pasadena, and then it starts to get a little bit drier in the afternoon. But I think rain sticks around for most of the game, especially during the first half. With the ball drop on New Year's Eve at midnight, it's going to be a wintry New Year's Eve. Not a lot of snow, but snow in the air is expected with flurries on and off throughout the evening hours. Could be a brief burst of some sort of moderate snow, but don't expect anything more than a coating at this point. It's going to be windy and cold. AccuWeather real field temperature only 14, so plenty of layers needed, hats and gloves and winter jackets for the to ring in the new year in Times Square.
Midtown Manhattan will be experiencing the coldest ball drop in 10 years, so attendees are advised to bundle up to avoid any potential cold weather injuries. And out in the Midwest, a powerful winter storm is beginning to sweep across the U.S., bringing strong winds and heavy snow. Millions are facing travel disruptions as the year comes to a close. NTD's Christina Corona has the details.
Millions of Americans are closing out 2025 under harsh winter weather. Nearly 67 million people remain under wind alerts across the Northeast and New England, from Washington, D.C. to Boston. Gusts could reach 50 miles per hour in Boston, 45 in New York City, and 40 in the nation's capital. Lake effect snow continues across the Great Lakes. About 7 million people remain under winter alerts, including areas near Lake Erie. In northwestern Pennsylvania, snow warnings are in place through 7 p.m. January 1st. Areas north of the I-90 could see up to 15 inches, while southern Erie County and parts of Crawford County may get up to 2 feet. In New York, Governor Kathy Hochul has declared a statewide emergency as the storm intensifies. Power outages have left more than 120,000 customers without electricity, mostly in Michigan, New York, and Pennsylvania. Holiday travel is also affected. According to FlightAware, airlines reported over 300 cancellations and 5,000 delays as of Tuesday afternoon, with the Northeast and Midwest hit the hardest. And in California, Pasadena's 137th Rose Parade faces a nearly 100% chance of rain. Showers Wednesday morning could affect those camping out, with moderate rain continuing through New Year's Day. This will be the first significant rainfall at the parade since 2006. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Amid the Minnesota fraud, one daycare center there is claiming all its important documents were stolen in a break-in. Find out more about that after this break.